My name is Mark, and I need to tell someone what happened to me at Waverly Hills Sanatorium. I know you probably won't believe me, but I have to get this out before I lose what's left of my sanity. It's been 3 weeks since that night, and I still can't sleep without seeing those hollow eyes staring back at me from the darkness. I'm a paranormal investigator, or at least I was. 23 years of chasing ghosts, debunking frauds, and documenting the unexplained. I'd seen it all, or so I thought. Waverly Hills was supposed to be just another case, another old building with tragic history and overactive imaginations. How wrong I was. The sanatorium sits like a concrete cancer on the hills outside Louisville, Kentucky. Built in 1910 to house tuberculosis patients, it became known as one of the most haunted places in America after closing in 1961. Over 63,000 people died within those walls, men, women, children, all wasting away from the white plague that had no cure. The body chute, a tunnel built to secretly remove corpses so patients wouldn't see the constant stream of death, still runs beneath the building like a concrete throat leading straight to hell. I should have turned around the moment I saw the place. Even in broad daylight, Waverly Hills looked wrong. The 5-story Art Deco building stretched across the hilltop like a sleeping beast, its hundreds of windows reflecting the dying October light like dead eyes. Paint peeled from the exterior walls in long, leprous strips, and weeds pushed through cracks in the foundation. But it was the silence that should have warned me, a heavy, oppressive quiet that seemed to swallow sound itself. My client, Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, was the granddaughter of a former patient. She'd inherited some of her grandmother's belongings and wanted me to investigate whether the old woman's spirit was still trapped inside. The pay was good, too good to refuse, and I needed the money. My divorce had left me broke, and this job would cover rent for 3 months. I arrived at sunset, my equipment cases weighing heavy in my hands as I climbed the crumbling front steps. The main entrance had been sealed years ago, but Mrs. Hartwell had arranged access through a side door. The key turned with a grinding screech that echoed through the empty corridors beyond. The smell hit me first, a nauseating cocktail of mold, decay, and something else I couldn't identify. Something sweet and cloying that made my stomach turn. I pulled a dust mask over my nose and mouth, clicked on my flashlight, and stepped inside. The lobby stretched before me like a cathedral of neglect. Chunks of plaster had fallen from the ceiling, creating treacherous piles of debris on the warped wooden floor. Graffiti covered the walls, most of it the usual teenage nonsense, but some of it disturbed me. Messages like "They're still here and don't go to room 502" were scratched into the paint with desperate intensity. I set up my base camp in what had once been the reception area, arranging my digital recorders, electromagnetic field detectors, and infrared cameras in a neat semicircle. The familiar ritual calmed my nerves, giving me the illusion of control over whatever waited in the darkness above. My plan was simple: start on the first floor and work my way up, documenting anything unusual. I'd done this hundreds of times before. But as I began my ascent to the first patient ward, I realized this place was different. Each step on the rotting staircase sent echoes bouncing through the building like gunshots, and I had the unmistakable feeling that something was listening to every sound I made. The first floor had been the children's ward. Tiny hospital beds still lined the walls, their metal frames twisted and rusted. Surgical instruments lay scattered across the floor, and in one corner, a child's doll sat propped against the wall, its porcelain face cracked and staring. The EMF detector in my hand began to chirp sporadically, indicating fluctuations in the electromagnetic field. I was photographing a particularly disturbing mural, stick figures drawn in what looked like rust-colored paint, when I heard it. A soft sound, barely perceptible above the wind outside. Giggling. Children's laughter, faint and distant, coming from somewhere deeper in the building. My blood ran cold. I knew the place was supposed to be empty, but urban explorers and thrill-seekers sometimes broke in. I called out, my voice cracking slightly, "Hello? Is someone there?" The laughter stopped immediately, cut off as if someone had flipped a switch. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the rapid beeping of my EMF detector, which was now going haywire. The needle was pinned to the maximum reading, indicating an electromagnetic field so strong it was off the charts. I backed toward the stairwell, my heart hammering against my ribs. As I reached the doorway, I made the mistake of looking back. Every bed in the ward was now occupied by small, translucent figures. Children in hospital gowns, their skin gray and mottled, their eyes black holes in their faces. They sat perfectly still, watching me with those terrible empty sockets. I ran. I stumbled up the stairs 3 at a time, my equipment bag banging against my hip, the beam of my flashlight bouncing wildly across the walls. Behind me, I could hear them, the soft whisper of bare feet on rotting floorboards, following me up through the darkness. The second floor was the adult tuberculosis ward, and the temperature dropped at least 20 degrees the moment I stepped off the staircase. My breath came out in visible puffs, and frost began forming on the metal frames of the hospital beds. The smell was stronger here, that sweet, cloying odor I'd noticed earlier. It was the smell of death, I realized. Of bodies left too long in the heat. Room 502 was at the end of the hall. I knew the stories. A nurse named Mary Hillenberg had hanged herself there in 1928 after discovering she was pregnant and infected with tuberculosis. Another nurse had jumped from the window years later. The room was supposed to be the most active paranormal hotspot in the entire building. I should have avoided it. Should have turned around and walked away. But something was drawing me forward, pulling me down that corridor like an invisible hand around my throat. My feet moved without my conscious control, carrying me past empty rooms where shadows seemed to shift and writhe in my peripheral vision. The door to room 502 stood slightly ajar, and a pale light flickered beyond it. Not electric light, something softer, more organic. As I approached, I could hear a voice inside, humming a lullaby in a sweet, melodic tone that made my skin crawl. I pushed the door open with trembling fingers. The room was exactly as it had been in 1928. A perfectly made hospital bed sat in the center, and medical equipment that should have been removed decades ago lined the walls. But it was the figure in the nurse's uniform that made me scream. She hung from a rope tied to the ceiling fixture, her neck bent at an impossible angle, her face purple and swollen. But her eyes were alive, burning with an intelligence and malevolence that pierced straight through me. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, and that horrible humming continued to pour from her throat. "You shouldn't have come here, Mark," she whispered, her voice like autumn leaves scraping across concrete. "Now you'll never leave." I didn't remember running from the room. The next thing I knew, I was on the 3rd floor, pressed against a wall, hyperventilating. My equipment bag was gone, dropped somewhere in my panic. All I had left was my flashlight, and its beam was growing dimmer by the minute. The 3rd floor was a maze of surgical suites and operating theaters. Ancient gurneys sat in the hallways, stained with substances I didn't want to identify. In one room, I found surgical instruments arranged in neat rows, as if someone had been preparing for an operation just moments before. The EMF readings here were constant, a steady, high-pitched whine that seemed to come from the walls themselves. That's when I heard the footsteps above me. Slow, deliberate, pacing back and forth across the ceiling. Someone, or something, was on the 4th floor, and it knew exactly where I was. I found the stairwell and began climbing, drawn upward by a compulsion I couldn't resist. The 4th floor had been the administrative level, filled with offices and meeting rooms. Most of the doors were closed, but I could see light seeping from beneath several of them, the same pale, organic glow I'd seen in room 502. The footsteps had stopped, but I could feel a presence watching me from the darkness. My flashlight beam seemed weaker here, swallowed by shadows that pressed in from all sides. At the end of the corridor, a single door stood open, revealing what had once been the head administrator's office. Inside, a man in a white coat sat behind a massive wooden desk, writing in a ledger with a fountain pen. He looked up as I approached, and I saw that half his face was missing, eaten away by disease. Tuberculosis had claimed him decades ago, but he was still here, still working, still keeping records of the dead and dying. "Mark Sanderson," he said, consulting his ledger. "Age 43. Divorced. No children. Cause of death." He paused, looking directly at me with his one remaining eye. "To be determined." "I'm not dead," I whispered, my voice barely audible. He smiled, revealing teeth blackened with rot. "Not yet. But you will be? They all die here, Mark. That's what this place does. It takes people and keeps them forever." The temperature plummeted again, and I could see my breath in thick clouds. Behind me, I heard the soft shuffle of feet, dozens of them, filling the corridor. I turned to see patients in hospital gowns crowding the hallway, their faces gaunt and wasted, their eyes reflecting my flashlight beam like animals. They moved slowly, inexorably forward, reaching for me with skeletal fingers. I ran toward the window at the end of the corridor, desperate to escape. But as I reached for the latch, a hand grabbed my wrist. It was the nurse from room 502, her rope still around her neck, her purple face inches from mine. "The body chute," she hissed. "That's the only way out. But it doesn't lead where you think it does." She released me, and I stumbled backward. The patients were closer now, forming a circle around me, their mouths opening and closing in silent screams. I could smell the disease on them, the sweet rot of tuberculosis eating them from the inside out. I broke through their circle and ran for the stairs, taking them 4 at a time in my desperation to reach the ground floor. Behind me, I could hear them following, not running, but walking with that same deliberate pace, knowing I couldn't escape. The 5th floor was a nightmare of collapsed ceilings and twisted metal. Water dripped constantly from broken pipes, creating pools of stagnant liquid that reflected my flashlight beam like black mirrors. This had been the children's surgical ward, and the operating tables were still there, child-sized and covered in rust-colored stains. But it was the sound that nearly broke my sanity, the constant crying of children, echoing from every room. Not the normal crying of scared or hurt children, but something worse. The sound of souls in torment, trapped forever in their moment of greatest suffering. I found the entrance to the body chute in what had been the morgue. A concrete tunnel sloped down into absolute darkness, disappearing into the earth beneath the sanatorium. This was how they'd removed the bodies, sliding them down the chute like packages, hiding the constant stream of death from the patients who were still clinging to hope. The nurse had said it was the only way out, but as I stared into that black throat, I understood what she meant. It didn't lead to the outside world. It led somewhere else entirely, a place where the dead waited for the living to join them. I had no choice. The footsteps were getting closer, echoing from every floor now. The entire building was alive with the spirits of the dead, and they all wanted me to stay. I sat down at the edge of the chute, my legs dangling into the darkness, and pushed off. The slide down was longer than I'd expected, and absolutely silent except for the scraping of my clothes against concrete. I fell through complete darkness for what felt like minutes, accelerating until I was sure I would die when I hit the bottom. But I didn't hit bottom. Instead, I fell into water, cold, stagnant water that tasted of chemicals and decay. I surfaced, gasping and choking, in what appeared to be an underground cavern. My flashlight had somehow survived the fall, and its weak beam revealed a vast space filled with standing water. Bodies floated around me in the murky liquid, dozens of them, in various states of decomposition. Some were recent, their flesh still intact but marble pale. Others were nothing but bones held together by rotting fabric. They bobbed gently in the water like obscene lilies, their empty eye sockets following my movements. This was where they'd really disposed of the bodies, not in some distant cemetery, but here in this flooded basement, hidden beneath the sanatorium. Thousands of victims of tuberculosis, dumped and forgotten, left to rot in this underwater charnel house. I swam desperately toward what I hoped was an exit, pushing aside floating corpses that seemed to reach for me with skeletal hands. The water was thick and oily, and something kept brushing against my legs, soft, yielding things that I refused to identify. Finally, I found a drainage tunnel that led upward. I pulled myself out of that hellish pool and crawled through the pipe, inch by agonizing inch, until I saw a glimmer of light ahead. It was the outside world, real moonlight, not the pale glow of the damned. I emerged from a storm drain half a mile from the sanatorium, covered in filth and shaking with hypothermia. My car was still parked where I'd left it, but when I looked back at the building, every window was illuminated with that pale light. Figures stood silhouetted in each one, watching me, waiting for me to return. I drove straight to the police station and tried to report what I'd found in the flooded basement. They listened politely, took my statement, and promised to investigate. But when they went to Waverly Hills the next day, they found no standing water, no bodies, no flooded cavern. Just empty rooms and the usual urban decay. The official report stated that I'd suffered a psychotic break brought on by stress and isolation. They recommended psychiatric evaluation and suggested I find a new line of work. My reputation as a paranormal investigator was destroyed overnight. But I know what I saw in that place. I know what's waiting in the shadows of Waverly Hills Sanatorium. The dead don't rest there, they're trapped, hungry, desperate for company. And they're still looking for me. 3 weeks have passed, and the dreams are getting worse. Every night, I'm back in those corridors, surrounded by the diseased and dying. The nurse with the rope around her neck visits me regularly, reminding me that I made a promise by entering her domain. She says I belong to them now, that eventually I'll return to take my place among the permanent residents of Waverly Hills. My apartment is always cold now, no matter how high I turn the heat. I find wet footprints on my floor in the morning, small ones, like children's feet. And sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, I can hear that lullaby humming, soft and sweet and absolutely terrifying. I'm writing this as a warning. Don't go to Waverly Hills. Don't investigate the paranormal claims. Don't trust the people who say it's just an old building with a tragic history. Some places are evil, not because of what happened there, but because of what continues to happen there, night after night, in the spaces between life and death. The tuberculosis patients who died in agony within those walls are still dying, over and over again, trapped in an endless loop of suffering. And they want others to share their fate. They want the living to join them in their eternal torment. I can feel them calling to me now, their voices growing stronger each day. The nurse with the rope around her neck stands at the foot of my bed, pointing toward the window, toward the hills where that concrete monument to death waits in the darkness. Soon, I think I'll have to go back. Not because I want to, but because I no longer have a choice. The moment I set foot in Waverly Hills, I became part of its story, another chapter in its endless book of horror. If you're reading this, and I'm gone, you'll know where to find me. I'll be in room 502, or walking the children's ward, or floating in that underwater cemetery beneath the building. I'll be one of them, the permanent residents of the most haunted place on earth. Just remember, some doors should never be opened, some places should never be explored, and some stories should never be told. But it's too late for me to stop now. They're coming for me tonight. I can hear them in the walls, in the pipes, in the spaces between heartbeats. The dead of Waverly Hills are calling me home. God help me, I think I'm ready to answer.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like and subscribe button, and then share it with your friends. Your support helps us grow and create even more awesome content. We appreciate you being part of the journey.